Hello, Mark.
Joe, I have a question, of course.
You would think that by now I would be expecting those questions.
Yes, I seem to hit you by total surprise every single time. So I think this might help and be connected to our guest. So what piece of technology really frightens you?
Technology frightening me. Are you kidding? Let's see. The first thing to come to mind is bungee jumping, but that's not really technology, is it?
That's a technology.
Because I just saw a video of some guy where it snapped.
Uh-huh.
And then he hit the water and his feet were like still tied to but fortunately he could swim. So that kind of frightens me, but that's not the kind of technology you're talking about.
Well, I think that applies. I mean, you definitely don't want to lie about your weight when they ask you how much you weigh.
That's not the time. Well, I'll tell you a little story about technology. I went to Ryerson Polytechnical University and I was taking radio and television arts. So there's lots of technology involved. And I was the kind of guy up to that point where I had worked at a radio station before then. And I would have the guy before me who worked the shift before me, who just happened to be James Murray, who also works at the CBC. I'd get him to queue up the reel-to-reels for me because I was afraid to. I was afraid of the reel-to-reels.
So you're afraid of your fingers getting caught and
I just
cut off
do it. It seemed like too complicated. And I was 16 at the time when I started. Yeah. So I would say, Jim, could you, he'd be, yeah, sure. Whatever. I'm going to go much farther in my career, I can see, than you are. And it was true. We could tell that right back at the reel-to-reel stage. But at university, or the Polytechnical Institute, as it was called at the time, well, now it's a completely different name, Toronto Metropolitan University. But anyway, I decided I was no longer going to be afraid of technology. And I never have been since.
And how about our guest, Benoit?
No technology really scares me, but certain technology really annoys me.
Okay. So what annoys you?
Right now, it's the technology du jour. It's AI.
The bro AI, you mean?
Well, basically the ChatGPT / the AI
that nobody wants or needs.
Yeah, basically the stuff that's trying to replace my writing career with really dull, middle of the road stuff.
Yeah. Now, this wasn't supposed to be a gotcha, but I'm surprised that neither of you are afraid of nuclear weapons.
Nope.
Wow.
Well, I guess I instantly went to technology that I have to use, and I don't typically have to use nuclear weapons. So okay, here's a question, because you mentioned ChatGPT, and I know a lot of people are up in arms against ChatGPT.
Yeah.
But do you guys not think that if it's used as a tool, like other technology, that maybe it isn't so scary after all?
Well, what I was thinking was it is a tool, and everything that we use are tools. It's just that for me, like I said, I'm not afraid of it. It's just really annoying because I'm an indie author and the field is already fairly packed, shoulder to shoulder indie authors, and that's great. But now anybody with a prompt can throw a veritable tsunami of more stuff on the market. And so it's not so much that I'm afraid of it. It's like, great, now we have to contend with this assault of really kind of mediocre stuff that's going to be coming onto us, kind of thing.
Well, and do you think the publishers will actually accept that mediocre stuff?
But they don't need to. That's the thing. If you're an indie published person, you don't need to go through a publisher. You just create a cover using Midjourney or Stable Diffusion, and you give a prompt to the computer, say, write me a 300-page novel on this topic, and then upload it to Amazon. You just bypass the publisher entirely, and that's the problem to me, is that if that's not kind of curbed, then there's going to be a full frontal assault of millions of titles, and your stuff gets drowned out. And it'll look great, and if you don't have to declare, well, this is written by an AI, then you're even more lost in the sea than you may have been in the past.
There's only one way you're wrong. You'll be even more drowned out.
Yes.
Right. Because I would argue that that's kind of already happening.
That's what I'm saying.
There's lots of people that aren't even using AI yet, and there's just lots of garbage.
No,
stuff
absolutely.
getting
That's what I'm
uploaded.
saying.
So
Yeah. So
yeah.
even now, there's like 14,000 books coming out every year from everybody. But I've already seen the TikToks of people saying, "This is how to write a book, guys, using these 2 different AIs, and you can write 1,000 a day." And I was like, yay! It takes 30 seconds.
And like, what's the fun in that?
It's not the fun
Seriously.
though.
Yeah.
It's a grift. That's all it is.
Yeah.
That there's no fun in it. There's no, I mean, if you're a writer and it's in your bones and you have to write. If you're using an AI to write 1,000 books a day, there's no fun in that. It's not for the fun.
Do you think it's possible, though, just to play devil's advocate, that eventually AI technology will get so good and produce such good, entertaining art that we'll all be just like, "Oh, screw it. You know what? This is good. Let's just sit back and enjoy."
Well, how are we going to make our money?
I'm just questioning what happens to the human spirit at that point.
Yeah.
We'll need the technology created entertainment to basically keep us from killing ourselves.
Yeah. Oh boy, that's bleak.
This has got real dark.
This got real dark, real
and
fast.
It should. I mean, this is real talk, right?
Yeah. Actually, it really is real talk. I mean, I'm querying again, so I've even seen amongst agents saying no AI generated letters. I'm like, oh my god, why would you do that? Like, it's just so stupid.
There's a couple of magazines like Analog and Asimov that they've stopped taking submissions exactly because of this, because they were flooded overnight.
Yeah.
With exactly what I was telling you. And I mean, for now, AI may get good, but it's not creative. It's just basically stealing bits and pieces, right?
Yeah.
So it's not creating anything new. It's taking things that we think we might enjoy from a whole bunch of different places and reorganizing them to make something quote unquote new, but it's not. And I mean, the more it produces, the more it becomes middle of the road.
Mm-hmm.
It basically evens itself out.
The best that's going to happen is it's going to be derivative. And I think the best headline I've seen about this is that they describe this kind of AI as a blurry JPEG of the internet.
Basically.
It's basically all it's doing. It's using that as its data set, and it's largely
because
garbage.
I was thinking that maybe it was analogous to the automobile taking the place of the horse and carriage, but it isn't really analogous, is it? Because the horse and carriage can get you from point A to point B, but in this case, the ChatGPT, it's not actually getting it to point B, is it?
No,
not yet.
Not yet.
Well, yeah. Right now, they say that its IQ is approximately 87, and it's already doing some amazing stuff. And I mean, I have friends who use it to help code. You tell it, hey, find the error in my code, and that's great. Like I said, it can be a great tool. Find the errors that I made in my code, so it'll reference the stuff and find the errors. It can run stuff really easily, so that you don't have to do the drudgery. It's kind of like having a dishwasher or a washing machine instead of doing everything by hand for computers, which can be great. But when it comes to creative stuff, it's really annoying for people who have studied for years to become creatives, and then all of a sudden their stuff gets stolen to entertain people who don't really care.
Yeah. I would love to have a visual artist on the show who has had some of their stuff essentially stolen by the AIs for their data sets, right? Yeah, like any of them, because there's lots of people out there, and in fact, they're actively fighting the robots, which is interesting. But I will say this: those things mastered hands very quickly. Yes. Like at first, it was a real joke how badly they did on hands, but now they can do hands, and that's less than a year.
Yeah, this is version 5 of Midjourney for sure.
Yeah. It's pretty scary how fast it goes.
I dare them to produce a podcast as good as this one.
Give it 3 months.
Except they'll all talk like this.
That's right. Okay, you mentioned creativity, and I think maybe that's a good segue into what it is that we've invited you to talk about, which is to choose a piece of art or creativity and how it inspires you.
Okay. So, I mean, one of the things that influenced me the most when I was younger, that really sort of veered me towards science fiction, which is what I write, was Akira by Katsuhiro Otomo, who is a Japanese mangaka. He's an illustrator. He wrote and he illustrated his entire series, and it's basically one of the most held up classic mangas in Japan, and even the animation that was made is still held up as being one of the best and still most artfully produced animes from the book. I mean, it's fairly true to the original story, not entirely true to it because it's a 6-volume bricks. But the movie is absolutely gorgeous, and it's dystopian. It's cyberpunk in the true sense of the word. I did not discover it. My mother actually put this in my hands. She's a huge comic book fan, but she is more into BD, which is the European form of comics. So Lucky Luke, you may know Tintin,
Yeah,
Asterix and
Tintin.
Obelix, that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So I mean, she's got shelves at home, and that's what I was immersed in when I was a kid. And we used to travel. I come from Winnipeg, and we used to travel to Quebec to see family, and she would buy us entertainment for the road, and she put this in my hands, not knowing that it's not for children.
I made that mistake with one of my nephews. I gave him Sandman
Oh boy.
before reading it.
Yeah. How old was he? And is he okay?
Is he recovered?
He was like 9 or 10 or something. Then I went out and bought it and read it, and then instantly phoned my sister and said, "Wait."
No wonder she doesn't want to talk to you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But now I realize that ChatGPT actually could do a better podcast than this because we've screwed up the order, Mark.
No, I knew we missed something, but that's okay. We missed the part where we ask you to introduce yourself, Benoit.
Oh.
What do you do? Why do you like to do it? That kind of thing. But
I'm just some guy off the street. I just walked in.
We couldn't get a guest. Yeah.
Hey, you, come here. What? Yeah, we'll
Sorry,
give you coffee and a donut. Okay.
So yeah, but you're a writer. You're
Yeah,
a Canadian science fiction writer, and you're from Quebec originally. Is that correct?
Well, so all roundabout, I was born in Ontario. I moved to Manitoba when I was 7, following my father because he used to work for the National Research Council. Moved to Quebec because most of my family is from here originally when I was in my 20s, and I've sort of been hanging about here ever since. And I like Quebec actually. I love the province. I love the people, and yeah, it's a great place.
And you are bilingual?
I am bilingual. Yeah.
I have a question that relates to the Asterix and Obelix
Sure.
books, which is: are the puns as good in French as they are in English?
You know, I've never read it in English.
Oh, interesting.
I've always read it when I read something. Since I am bilingual, I try to read it in the original language because some things never translate well.
Right.
I'm always amazed. I read those books, and they're hilarious. They're hilarious as a kid, and then they're even really very much funnier as adults. And I always think these puns are so good in English. They must just like melt your face in French.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, they're amazing in French, but like I said, unfortunately, I tend to stick to the original language for whatever I read as much as I can.
Oh, why not? I mean,
yeah, if you can, why not? Right?
You can. Yeah.
And now, was one of your parents from France or Belgian?
No. Both my parents are Quebecois. It's just, I guess, at some point in time, I mean, they really love their comics, and I mean, in Quebecois culture, comics are more of the European variety than the American variety, just because they're usually from Belgium or France. You know, you'll get a lot more of the styles that I mentioned before than, you know, Avengers or X-Men or that sort of stuff in Quebec. And it's usually, you know, hardcover books. Yeah, it's a totally different style.
Mm-hmm. And large format too.
Yeah, large format. Like I have a lot of them on my shelf as well. I really enjoy them.
Have you ever written comics or graphic novels? Or?
No. I mean, I've never done anything illustrated. I mean, I have a kid's book, but it's illustrated by a gentleman in Spain. That was kind of on a lark. I wanted to try my hand at a kid's book. It's called The Booger Hunter's Apprentice.
And how'd that go?
Parents hate it.
So successful.
I'm kidding. No, it's kind of half and half. Like when I do Comic Cons, parents love it. When I do a parent oriented show, they kind of look at me suspiciously and walk by and hold their children closer, kind of.
And so tell us briefly about your other work.
Sure. Yeah, my science fiction series is called the Spectrum series. My wife is Japanese, and so we spent some time living in Japan, and I go back every year. And so when I was living over there for about a year and a half when we first met, I was living in a small village where she comes from, and I didn't have a whole lot of people to talk to because my Japanese, let's face it, was pretty terrible. And so I started writing stories to get my feelings out. And every day I would go down the mountain, Ito Hazaka, 19 hairpin turns, and then drive half an hour into town down the Royal Road. And I would create all these stories at 7 a.m. And then I would get home after work, and then I would type them all up. And that's what kind of gave me the courage to attempt a full length novel. And that's how I started my series. It takes place 300 years in the future in the vertical city of Tokyo, and all of Japan lives in it. 180 million people, and the city is basically the main character, and it follows the adventures of various people who are living in it. So that's it.
And what happens to the rest of Japan?
It's mostly underwater.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, and that's basically what happened to the most of the world.
Yeah.
So we're living in a phase where the waters are starting to recede slowly in the rest of the world, but everybody's like survival mode for the most of the world, except for Africa and Japan.
Cool. They sound good. And how many are out of those?
There are 3 books in the series. There's Red Nexus, Blue Node, and Green Matrix. And Green Matrix came out in November of last year, and now I'm starting to write the outline for Yellow Core, which will be, I'm hoping, out next year.
Cool.
Okay, so now back to your choice.
Sure.
For when did that movie come out?
1988, I believe.
And it still holds up. I just watched it just recently.
Oh,
yeah,
for the first time?
Yes, it was. It was for the first time.
Yeah. Akira is still considered one of the best masterpieces of animation that was ever made from Japan. Like, it's just absolutely gorgeous. You could frame every single frame of that movie and put it on your wall. It's so beautiful,
And now, so can you recap the story for?
In true cyberpunk fashion, so there's like the powers that be, the syndicates and things like that, but that it's more of a government thing actually in this story instead of syndicates and corporations. So it's the story of 2 teenage boys who go to this school for orphans, I guess, and there's a huge poverty problem, and they're both bikers. Kaneda is the leader of a biker gang, and he has an amazing motorcycle. Tetsuo Shima is his sidekick, if you will, and he's kind of living in his shadow. And they drive off one time into this area that's being reconstructed for the upcoming, I believe, is 2022 Olympics or something like that. So that's where a nuclear bomb was detonated way back in the day, and this is 30 years after that event. And so they go onto this abandoned highway. They stop there, and then this sort of weird small child appears out of nowhere. Basically, there's an accident, and Tetsuo is taken away by the army because he gets something happens to him. He gets taken away by the army, and it's discovered that he's got these sort of really bizarre mental powers, and it's all due to the massive amounts of drugs that they do. So Kaneda spends the rest of the movie, first of all, trying to find his friend. There's some sort of faction, this revolutionary faction going against the government that comes into play as well. There's protests. In the second half of the movie, stuff happens and Tetsuo's power come into their own, and it just goes ballistic. So yeah.
Have you seen it, Mark?
Yes, I have. You're describing it, I'm going, wait a minute, I've seen this movie.
Yeah.
Because I was about to say, I don't think I've seen this, because it was only recently, like within the last 2 years that I finally saw Howl's Moving Castle.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm way behind on manga, basically. That's where I come from. I was going to say, we have to introduce you to our former guest, Tim Blackmore, because I know for a fact this is one of his favorite movies.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
he's got a poster of it in his office.
If you enjoyed Howl's, then you will just absolutely devour Princess Mononoke.
Oh, I have seen that too.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, that's a good
one. And what's the one with the fighter planes?
Porco Rosso?
Yeah, Porco Rosso. I also saw that one recently too, and I loved it. That was such an odd movie.
Yeah, all Studio Ghibli movies are amazing.
Yeah,
yeah. Hayao Miyazaki.
Oh yeah,
love that
the
guy.
master.
Yeah. So, what are the threads that connect between Akira and sort of your own work? Like, is it sort of the dystopian Japanese thing that sort of?
I think at the time when I saw that, I was kind of, half fantasy reader and half science fiction. And that's the one that just went, okay, you're a science fiction guy from now on. Like, put the other stuff aside. You're now a hardcore sci-fi guy. So I started reading a lot of William Gibson and stuff like that. And I really enjoyed A.A. Attanasio, who wrote Radix and other stuff like that, Orson Scott Card. But I always preferred the sort of cyberpunk over the spacefaring sci-fi stuff. I mean, I love my Star Wars, but for reading, I really like sort of the gritty, earthbound sort of stuff that happens because it feels more real or plausible to me. I'm maybe. So that's sort of what influenced me into starting to write cyberpunk. And I would definitely point directly at Akira as being one of the major influences.
William Gibson is such an amazing writer.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
He's like, and stylistically, he just keeps getting better and better, I've noticed.
Yeah. I mean, I basically consider him like the sort of sci-fi Shakespeare, if you will, just for reading his earlier stuff, like his first 5 books. It's just so visually appealing in his words, he's very imaged.
Weirdly, I have never read William Gibson. It's a startling admission.
Start from the beginning. It's really good.
Yeah, it's worth reading some of it. Yeah.
Yep.
And don't ignore his later stuff, because some of his later stuff is really, really good.
Oh no, they're all good. They're all good, but he changes style. He becomes more narrative driven and less word choice driven, if you will. The stories are still amazing, but it's less about the words and more about an encompassing story, I think.
Yeah.
All right. I will do that.
This podcast is basically giving us the to be read pile that will never be finished.
That's right.
We do have to recognize that. Because every week it's just like more stuff gets added to the pile.
Well, because at first I was relieved, right? Because I'm like, okay, he's chosen a movie that I've already seen. I don't need to rush out to see that. Oh, William Gibson. Oh, damn. Okay. All right.
Let me just add more things onto your pile.
Yeah. Maybe someday we could have William Gibson on, and then maybe we should read one of his books beforehand.
Yes.
Start with Neuromancer.
Yeah, that's a good
choice. Classic. Yeah.
Because we have all these guests on who are artistic people and they've written books and whatnot. And I feel like I need to read all their books. And I know this is a common conundrum that, those of us who write have, that we know so many writers, but you can't possibly read all their work. How do you guys deal with that?
I just don't. I'm kidding.
I used to feel guilty about it, but I've released that because it's as you say, it's impossible.
Yeah.
So I think the way that I kind of approach it is that if it's something that genuinely I think I'm going to like, I read it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's in my
I think that has to be the rule.
yeah, if it's in my wheelhouse, then I'll definitely pick up their book and hey, can you sign it? And then I'll read it, and that's about it. And I'm pretty much all sci-fi or sociological or like, and not a lot of my friends write sociology or psychology or history or stuff like that. So I'll get that from another source, but I'll get their sci-fi books basically.
Yeah, the other thing that I will do is if someone really would like me to read their book as they're working on it, I will occasionally say, yes, I can do that for you.
Oh, man. Do you really want to put that in a podcast?
Yeah, not really. No, I said occasionally if someone, and I did say a friend, didn't I?
Give them an inch.
Yeah. So like, I'm not just taking anybody's manuscript because otherwise it will not get read. Yeah.
So you know, everybody, Mark just said that he'll take all of your manuscripts.
I
will definitely cut that out of this episode. I don't have access to the files, but I'll find a way.
Because I got to be honest, like there's a very select few friends of mine that I will read their stuff. My time is so limited that, I got, a few books that I want to read for pleasure, and then my own writing and now editing a podcast, and I don't have time to read your manuscript.
Yeah.
Unless your name is Jen or Tana. That's it.
There you go.
All right. All you Jen and Tanas out there, you heard it.
Oh, I see. I needed to be more specific.
Spark up that web chat GPT.
The flood of gens in your inbox.
Thousands of gens with their garbage manuscripts.
Fortunately, maybe there isn't a whole lot of Tanas. I might be okay on that front.
Well, there's probably enough.
Okay, back to Akira.
Yes.
What more can you tell us about Akira that people might not already know?
I mean, it's a huge influence on so many people. Tons of artists. My sister actually got me a book.
He's reaching into his bookshelf.
Yeah. So this is called Otomo. It's a global tribute to the mind behind Akira, and it's like illustrations by some of the world's most talented artists who draw comics and manga, and as a tribute to Otomo. So like, the guy is the OG of manga cyberpunk in manga form. So it's just absolutely phenomenal. And I don't know, just the story itself is just so original, and it's actually, if you take away the action, if you take away all of the superficial stuff about it, and you delve into what or who Akira is and what Tetsuo, because you have to watch it all the way to the end to really understand what is going on. It's not a cyberpunk story. It is a very, very existential sort of what created the universe kind of idea.
Clearly, watching it once, as Mark and I have done, isn't enough.
Well, you should probably rewatch it with the ending in mind, and then going, oh, I see, okay. And just pay attention to Akira and Tetsuo as he becomes something.
Okay, cool. That sounds... Yeah, I will, because it's actually not unrelated to what I'm working on at the moment. So I might actually get something out of it.
I really appreciate actually the work that does that, that you get to the end and then it recontextualizes everything that came before, like the work of Gene Wolfe, for example. That is written with like multiple layers.
I like that.
Definitely.
I love that about works.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely a work of show don't tell. Like it. There might be that little bit at the end where he's kind of explaining to you what's going on, but you have to read between the lines to figure it out. Like it doesn't just come out and tell you, and I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah. This might be me reading between the lines, but is it possible that I'm thinking now about the graphic novel?
Yep.
That the graphic novel actually had a major influence on some North American and European writers as well? Because I think about The Dark Knight Returns, and there's some stuff in that seems very Japanese to me.
Well, I mean, as for Japanese manga, it has, I mean, in the present time, Japanese manga in general has a huge influence on stylistic sort of renderings in the entire world. Like I've noticed in the past 5 to 10 years that lines and eyes of characters have become very Japanese like. I mean, there's
Yeah.
still a sort of European / North American touch to it, but there is definitely huge influence of Japanese, but maybe not culture, but Japanese sort of the illustration effect on all of our stuff.
Yeah, the aesthetic
The
is
aesthetic is
definitely
definitely
the aesthetic has
definitely.
definitely gone mainstream. Like, there's
Yep.
no question that I don't think other cultures, people from other cultures, are surprised by that aesthetic the way
No,
that they would have been in the 80s.
exactly. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, you look at a comic from the 80s and it is not the same thing as it is today.
Yeah, but that's why I was asking you about that one specific instance, because to me it did seem like there was some crossover, but
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
just wow.
everything influences everything. And I mean, there wouldn't have been Japanese anime if American studios hadn't been looking for a cheap place to get their stuff animated in the
Right.
1980s. Back in the day, that was the place to get your animation done because it was super cheap, and that basically gave the opportunity for Japan to become really good at animation, and that's why we have such amazing stuff today. So, I mean, everything influences back and forth. And
So Otomo, he wrote the manga and then he wrote the screenplay for the film based on the
yes,
manga. Wrote the same
yep,
thing and equally effective doing both. Clearly,
yeah, we.
yeah. Um, yeah, I thought I was leading up to a question there, but it turned into not a question.
And I mean,
You had me all excited.
yeah, no, but
I was like, what's going to happen now?
yeah, I mean, it was a tough act to follow just because it is like the greatest, you know, and he hasn't really done anything else apart from that. I mean,
That was my question. That's where I was going. Yeah.
He did another movie called Steam Boy, and it was all right, but it wasn't. It was no Akira, and he also did another short. He did another short movie that was part of like a trilogy of some sort with two other animators, illustrators, and it was okay. But you know, I think after Akira, like, how do you beat that? You know, like,
Well, that's like the people who did Gone with the Wind. You know, they did this amazing, spectacular film, and it just took everything out of them, and then they never really had, anything else to. I think that happens from time to time, doesn't it?
right?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I can imagine, even if you want to create more, you might be afraid of trying something else, because how could you possibly match, what you.
Yeah,
JD Salinger, I don't think applies to him. I think he stopped writing for other reasons, but I can imagine that for some people, writing a book like that was The Catcher in the Rye, that was
yeah,
so influential, and then going, okay, now what do I follow that up with?
haunted by your own fame.
Yeah, I think a lot of musicians face that
I guess
problem with their second albums.
Yeah,
Yeah, the whole sophomore album and the sophomore book.
I think there's a reason for that. It's like you spend years and years perfecting your craft, your art, and you put years into something, and it's amazing, of course. And then you have 1 year to produce the next thing. It's like, okay, maybe it's not going to be quite as good.
Well, there is also the fact that, like, I know this for a fact to be true for me, is like, you know, after I wrote my first book of the series, I was like, I put all my best stuff in here. And then book 2 is like, oh, what do I write about now? I'm not saying it's not as good. It's just like, it's totally different. It's a whole different beast, because I had to, like the book 1, this is stuff that I've had trotting around in my head for years and years, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm going to use this material. And then you're trying to write the next book, and it's like, oh, I got to write something that's not exactly the same as the first book. It's got to be just as fun and, completely not the same. So
then there's the phenomena of, an artist who produces a number of bodies of work, And we talked about this before, Mark, where, how does a book become successful? And sometimes it's just luck,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that it's written at the right time.
Yeah, quite often,
and then
I
it
think,
becomes, and then it becomes amazing, but it may not actually be their best work, the one that becomes most popular.
Right.
I think of Douglas Adams. Obviously, everybody loves Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe, and everybody considers that his best work.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, his best book is Last Chance to See.
Oh, I love that book.
Yeah, which is an amazing book that only a small, I think, portion of people who've read Hitchhikers are probably even aware of that.
I don't know that one.
It's a nonfiction book. It's him going to see endangered species around the world. The stuff with the Komodo dragons is just hilarious.
Okay.
Oh yeah. See, that's the thing. Like, it's actually like it's important subject matter, but it's also unbelievably funny.
It's really funny. Yeah.
I mean, for me, it would probably be like Kurt Vonnegut. Everybody raves about Breakfast of Champions and and Slaughterhouse-Five, but some of my favorite books are not those. Like, I really enjoyed Slapstick and Cat's Cradle and that kind of thing.
Yeah, Cat's Cradle's my favorite.
Right? So it's,
though actually I think I'm alone in this because I haven't heard another writer say this, but I love Timequake.
I haven't read it.
It's like his last novel.
Okay.
And I got a very sentimental attachment to that book.
Okay.
It's worth your time anyway.
Okay.
Vonnegut keeps coming up in this podcast.
Well, he's good.
Yeah.
Good.
He's mentioned in our first episode, and then we devoted an entire episode to him, and here he is again.
Nice.
Okay. Any other thoughts then about Akira before we all go our merry ways?
No, I think that it's one of those perfect movies. It's every frame counts. It's multifaceted, and every character has their own personality and their own desires, and they're all doing what they think is the right thing to do. And it's one of, I would consider it like it's a perfect movie.
And in terms of your work, people should start with the first book of the trilogy, you think?
I recommend it.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you very much for being on our podcast, Recreative.
Well, thank you very much for having me tonight.
Lovely.
It was, yes, absolutely.
Yes, I forgot that we were going to do the podcast in those voices, weren't we? And now I am so glad we didn't.
Yeah, that's going to be a bit of a mess to clean up.
Yeah, thanks for giving me more editing, guys.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you, Benoit.
Well, thanks for inviting me. Have yourselves a great night, guys.
Yeah, you too, Benoit.
Thanks, Mark.
Lovely meeting you.
It was a pleasure.
So, Mark, you and I have discussed how people can support this podcast. And one of the ways I would like to get them to support us is by, and I think you're going to like this, by purchasing one of your books.
Ooh, I like that. How about your books?
We're going to start with your books.
We'll start with my books? Okay.
And today I would like to point people in particular to Alpha Max, which is a novel about the metaverse, which is kind of in vogue these days.
Yeah, and it doesn't take a lot of the standard approaches that the metaverse stories do. I think it's a bit more grounded.
It's funny, and it's witty, and it's smart, and it's entertaining.
Go to recreative.ca/support, and you can find our books there.
Alpha Max by Mark A. Rayner.